Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth installment of the UP Institute of Civil Engineering webinar series. To start off, let us all welcome our Institute Director, Dr. Maria Antonia Tanchuling.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to this webinar where we will tackle transportation planning and operations, and especially given the new normal, given the new conditions that we are in now. We are offering you this webinar as part of a series of activities to mark the 110 years anniversary of civil engineering. So we're celebrating our 110th year this year. So we have lined up a bunch of activities here. So we have a photo contest where we'd like to solicit your entries. Please submit photos and stories of your memorable experiences while you were in civil engineering. Please check also if you want to see there are already entries, and we have extended the deadline until July 22nd. So we'd like to invite all of you to submit your photos, and we'd like to acknowledge UP Alumni Engineers for supporting this event. We have very exciting prizes for you. No? I think the UP AE merchandise is quite special. Hindi po yan para sa lahat. And sali na kayo, it only happens once in every 110 years. Yan. And then, the winner we will announce during the virtual recognition rites. Also, another activity that we have is an online exhibit to showcase our research projects that we are doing in the Institute. We call it RISE-CE, or Research and Innovation for Service and Education in Civil Engineering. Please check our FB page for this online exhibit. So an example, we have ongoing, we're doing research projects on waste management, also modeling and transport analysis of pollutants for the rehabilitation of Manila Bay. Then we have the Phil Ikari project, e-trams, and then on something on child road traffic injury prevention, no, from NCTS and UNICEF. And then, so the other activities are this series of webinars. This is the fourth that we are offering. We have already featured, we started with water resources modeling. That's the first webinar, simultaneous with a book launch by Dr. Glenn Tabios, and then followed by a webinar regarding the future of the civil engineering profession. And then last week we had, we tackled construction management, and this week we will talk about transportation. So we got a lot of interest. Thank you so much. This seems to be a very hot topic that all of us are interested in. I think all of us are affected one way or another, as passenger, as driver, as maybe utility vehicle operator. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting afternoon. So, and then the last webinar would be next Friday. It's going to be about the Philippine Building Act, to be given by Dr. Benny Pacheco. Yeah. So we're very fortunate this afternoon that we have two esteemed speakers who are experts in this field. I'd like to personally thank Dr. Sheila Napalang and also Engineer John Mark Lucas. Maraming salamat for accepting our invitation. They will be properly introduced later by our moderator. So thank you so much to all of you participants for being here. We'd like to thank our sponsors. We'd like to thank UPRDFI, PICE, Also, we'd like to acknowledge the participation of among the audience. We have those coming from DPWH. Pwede po kayong pumalakpak. Palakpakan natin sila. DPWH, DOTR, of course, and our very supportive alumni of UP College of Engineering. And so, welcome po. No? So at this point, I'd like to call on the moderator, the chair of this session, Dr. Hilario Sean Palmiano. Sean, Dr. Sean, as we call him, is one of the professors of UP Institute of Civil Engineering. He's also the group head of the Transportation Engineering Group of ICE. Also the project leader of PSURD-funded ETRAMS, or Enhancement of Transportation Management Softwares. Also a team member of Zamboanga Transportation and Traffic Management Plan Study. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call on Dr. Palmiano. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Tonette. And likewise, I would like to greet everybody a wonderful afternoon. Magandang hapon po. And like you, I'm excited to listen to the presentations of our two speakers this afternoon. And also, we are looking forward to an interesting question and answer portion at the end of the presentations. Okay, to start, I'd like to, well, you have on your screens flashed the straightforward schedule we have for this webinar. We already had the welcome remarks from our director, Dr. Tan Chuling. And I'm going to give you, I'm giving you actually the overview of our webinar. And it will be followed soon by the presentations of Dr. Napalang and Engineer Lucas. And then, of course, we will be opening the floor for questions. So we're going to have the open forum, and then we'll end with some closing remarks from our director. Okay, for our webinar, we would like to remind everyone of our house rules. So later on, you will be asked to post your questions or perhaps comments. So let me just read through the bullets here. Chat is going to be disabled for Zoom attendees. So all questions, comments, and suggestions should be coursed through the Q&A box. I hope you are familiar with your Zoom windows. Dun po sa lower right part, meron diyang icon showing the Q&A. So if you want to post your questions and comments, you can easily do that by clicking on that and then typing your post or your questions. Okay, but we also have viewers from Facebook Live. Hello sa inyo. You can also type in your questions at the comment section naman ng ating Facebook Live. Do not worry, somebody is monitoring also the questions posted there. So we will also be picking out questions from that platform. Now, in posting your questions or comments or suggestions, kindly state your name and affiliation so that we can address you properly. Okay, and then we will screen and select and answer the questions at the end of the two presentations. All right, and of course, those who have pre-registered sa Zoom are going to receive certificates of participation. Okay, so these certificates of participation will be issued to Zoom attendees who have pre-registered and answered all our evaluation forms. Okay, later on, you will be, I understand that there's going to be a flashing window on your screens, merong pre and post evaluation forms. And please do not fail to answer those. Madali lang siya. I think it's just a one-pager thing. It's very easy to answer. So that's going to be launched in Zoom during the start and latter part of the webinar. And then the certificates will be sent via email within 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so I guess we're now ready for the presentations. Before the presentation, of course, let me formally introduce the first speaker. So the first speaker is currently the Assistant Secretary for Planning until July 2021. She is an associate professor at the UP School of Urban and Regional Planning and was a former director of the UP National Center for Transportation Studies for 3 years, from the period of July 2016 to 2019. She is one of the core members of the Women in Transport Leadership. This is a knowledge sharing network aimed at creating knowledge, fostering innovation, and empowering collaboration among women to address diverse transport challenges, particularly issues related to gender and transport. Her research interests include equitable transportation planning, strategies on integrating accessibility and gender issues in transport planning. All right, to present transport operations under the new normal based on the OTR plans. I think many of the participants are waiting to listen to this. Let us warmly ask Dr. Maria Gaabukayan na pala. Maring Shi.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Palmiano. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Pagpatawad nyo na hindi muna ako mag-video para po ma-manage ng bandwidth ko at maririnig nyo po ako. Sana po lahat kayo ay nasa mabuting kalusugan. It's my pleasure to present to you transport operations under the new normal based on the OTR policies and plans. Now, just to manage expectations, I would like to state at the start that this presentation will focus on urban transport. So therefore, it will cover road and rail transport. And it is also structured into two parts. The pre-pandemic, or the old normal, and then the post-ECQ, the new normal. And then I will cap it with by highlighting the initiatives that the department are undertaking moving forward. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Now, to understand where we are right now, it's best to look back on how it was before the pandemic changed our world. No? Ika nga ni Dr. Jose Rizal, ang hindi daw marunong lumingon sa pinanggagalingan ay may stiff neck. Ay hindi makakarating sa paruroonan. In English, George Santayana also says, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So let's just look back on how it was during the old normal. On the slide that we have right now, these images are familiar even during the old normal. You have passengers crowding in platforms and on the streets due to lack of public utility vehicles. So therefore, because there's lack, people competed for space and hence opted to wait on the streets. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Now, for instance, the MRT3, if you look at the data that we have, has had an average load factor of about 95% during 2019. So it's almost full. You can just imagine the people standing up. Next slide, please. Next slide. The old normal is likewise associated with long waiting time. As you can see there, it ranges for different kinds of vehicles. It ranges from 18 minutes to 34 minutes. In fact, there was a study that was conducted in 2014, which actually said that waiting time in Metro Manila can range between 1 minute to 2 hours. So kung sobra kang lucky, you are the 1 minute. And if you are not very lucky, you'd probably be waiting for 2 hours. Next slide, please. Now, if you notice in the next slide, please. Okay, if you notice in the previous slide, it says there that for the rail system, the waiting time is about 28 minutes. This one, it shows you that waiting to board for MRT pre-pandemic, meaning they're already in the platform, they would have to wait for about 8 minutes. This is not actually, this does not include the time to buy tickets and other pre-boarding activities. Next slide, please. Likewise, the old normal was had also people were able to get on when people were able to get on their rides, they would also have to endure long travel times that actually was touted as a waste of time, time that would have been otherwise used for more productive um, endeavors, right? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. The old normal, public transport operations. This is also a common sight. During the old normal, public transport drivers, but particularly the jeepney drivers, earned based on the number of passengers they will carry, which actually resulted to risky behavior like swerving and sudden stopping just so they could pick up passengers. Also, to maximize earnings, public transport drivers have been known to work for as long as 15 hours, which means that they're already really tired, which may cause a lot of road crashes. Next slide, please. Another characteristic of the old normal is the fragmented public transport operations. What do I mean by that? If you look at the data, it shows there that more than 90% of your operators owned one or two vehicles only. So it's very small scale, which means that you have a lot of operators, and which also means that it's very difficult to manage and regulate the public transport sector. Next slide. Next slide, please. All right. Now, as we move from old normal to new normal, let's look at mobility patterns. Due to the imposition of community quarantine and stricter health protocols. So for instance, if we look at the data that we have, this is an analysis of mobility data provided by Google, which shows the drop in movement around transit stations. Of course, that makes sense because people were scared to go out. We were on a lockdown, right? So there was a very, very minimal movement along the stations. But if you look at it, the drop was even more pronounced for Metro Manila than the national average. Again, if you remember, Metro Manila was the first one who had ECQ. Other cities, for instance, did not have ECQ immediately, like Cagayan de Oro and all those places. All right, next slide, please. Now, restricted mobility also resulted to decreased travel for retail and recreation, grocery and pharmacy, parks, workplaces in Metro Manila. There was actually an upward trend seen in the residential areas. Of course, because when the lockdown was imposed, people would be moving around their homes. So except for the fluctuations during weekends, residential activities increased by 40%, right? So, the reason why we're showing this is because these are actually short distance travels or trips that people do, which may then be a case, which can then be used for planning your transport sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Now, as can be seen in the slide, this is from the Interagency Task Force for COVID-19. This is transition from the old normal to new normal for transport. Because the primordial objective when COVID-19 hit us back in March was to ensure that we reduce transmission of the virus. So therefore, during the ECQ, all public transportation services were suspended. And also during MCQ, as you can see, only public shuttle and company shuttle were actually allowed, only for APOR as well. Okay. And then during GCQ, we now have a gradual resumption of our public transportation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. What was constant through it all? Sorry, go back lang. Anyway, one slide, please. All right. What was constant through it all, though, is the DOTR free ride for the health frontliners. Over time, we have 20 routes, which covered 69 hospitals. All right. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. As mentioned earlier, during GCQ, there was a gradual resumption of public transportation. But you know, now it's no longer about transport. The gradual resumption will have to be guided by a two-pronged objective. One, of course, is efficiency, which is to meet mobility requirements of the commuting public and ensure unhampered movement of goods to support economic activities. But equally important during the resumption of public transportation is safety. Safety as far as health is concerned, because we needed to control the spread of the virus through the reduction of transmission by implementation of stringent health and sanitary protocols. So therefore, this has now become our new normal. We wear masks all the time. For public transportation, we're shifting to cashless payments. We're also using thermal scanners across all the modes of transport. You also, with disinfection of high-touch surface in other facilities. We also have all public transportation should have contact tracing implemented. So therefore, as we've said, because of safety protocols, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Sorry. All right. Because of safety protocols, the passenger load limits have now been reduced. And now I will not go through it, but you can see, for instance, for everything is at 50% the capacity. It's been gradual, not 30% and then 50%. So all passengers should be seated apart, and there will be no standing passengers. Why no standing passengers? Because the likelihood of getting the virus if somebody is standing over you is increased exponentially. So that's why very stringent is that there will be no standees in our public transportation, right? And for UV Express, maximum of 2 passengers, for taxis and TNVS, right? And then, so therefore, to make sure that people understood it, next slide, please. There were visual guides that were made, distributed to ensure that people will set apart from each other, no? So color-coded lang po yun. Gusto ko kita na merong ganito para iwas talaga. Dapat naintindihan. For road transport, 50%. Rail transport, next slide, please. It's even more stringent. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. For rail, it's even really drastically reduced. Like for instance, LRT2 only carries 12% of its capacity. LRT2 is only 10% of its capacity. MRT3, which is one of our, even with problems of maintenance recently, MRT3 is still one of the most used rail lines. So only could carry 13%, and the PNR 20%. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So therefore, this is what you will see in the rail lines. No? Dapat makikita nyo po yan, meron talagang anong tawag nito? Nakakita na hindi pwedeng umupo dyan. So may nakaharang. Next slide, please. All right. So, pahirapan po. Sa new normal, pahirapan po talaga. Tama naman po yun. Next slide. All right. Pero despite the many tragedies and travails that this virus has brought us, it has also provided us a change point. Let me just discuss change point because ito kasi everybody says that the kanji or the Chinese character for crisis or disaster is also the same as that of opportunity. But I was reading that this is actually inaccurate. It actually is the kanji, is the character for change point. That's where we can make a difference. And so looking at what's been happening, one of the change points has been that the PUV modernization program that the agency has launched back in 2016 has now become highly adopted by the people. So we're now looking at reform and consolidation of the industry, because if you look at the objectives of the PUB modernization program, we are now meeting reform and consolidate the industry, as well as improve the standards of living of drivers, operators, and their family. I'll explain that in the next slide. Next slide, please. All right. Because of the pandemic, it has now become necessary to rationalize the routes, because it's important for us to ensure that people do not crowd in waiting areas. So a route rationalization was initially carried out by LTFRB and DOTR with the help of consultants from TTPI. And we based that on USEP model, EDSA bus feasibility study by SWECO, EDSA corridor report by ITP as part of RTRS and GIZ report on EDSA bus. You know, many people are asking, is there a feasibility study for it? Because of the fact that there's really short time for us to plan, we've made use of existing plans. Okay, we've made use of existing plans to ensure that we will be able to have a rational, EDSA bus system. All right. Now, if you look at the slide, I think this was from the routes have now been rationalized from 96 bus routes. They're now rationalized to 31 bus routes. And instead of 96 operators running this, we have only 2 consortia operating the 31 routes, which is the intention, which is one of the objectives of the PUV modernization program. Why is that important? Because if you have less number of operators running the routes, it's easier to manage them, and they would have ownership of the route, right? Now, because of this rationalization, we now also implement service contracting. What is service contracting? Instead of being paid based on the number of passengers that you carry, you actually get paid based on the vehicle kilometers that you run. So under this service contracting, even if you're not full, even if you don't have as many passengers, if you run the route, you'd still be able to get paid. Now, because of this, during the first day, this is data for the first day, we have faster travel times on the busway, okay, northbound and southbound. The bus augmentation, the bus routes that we have right now, which includes the EDSA bus augmentation scheme, we have 26 stations which contain 52 platforms to serve as waiting areas for passengers. At bawal na po ang boarding and alighting sa iba't ibang lugar. Isa pa pong change point na nangyari is ang mga drivers po under the service contracting, they now get salaries based on the 2012 and 2019 DOLE issuance. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, I'm not gonna talk about this a lot, but this is just to show you that right now, these are the allowed modes with limited capacity. I'd like to really just focus your attention on the number of jeepneys. There's like 6,002 units of jeepneys that now ply 49 routes. Why these jeepneys? because according to LTFRB, the PUJ on these routes have minimal or no overlaps with bus routes, because that's also one of the consideration. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Another change point is now under the new normal, we now use technology to reduce contact. So of course, we now have an automated fare collection system. Kumbaga po napadali, no? Kasi kailangan na eh. So dati po medyo mabagal ang uptake ng industry. Ngayon po dahil importante siya, napabilis po ang paglagay ng automatic fare collection system and even RFIDs, no? Ngayon ini-encourage na po na ang mga sasakyan ay may RFID para wala na pong contact with a toll center, with the toll agents po. Okay, and for instance, for LTO, we can now renew your licenses online. So leveraging technology is very important. Next po. Next po. Next slide, please. This I'm actually very excited about. Another change point is now, because of the pandemic, there's now a rediscovery of the use of bicycles, right? Let me just give you a bit. The reason why I'm really excited about the uptake is that NDOTR commissioned the National Center for Transportation Studies of the National Environmentally Sustainable Transport Strategy of the Philippines. Sorry, a mouthful. And one of the pillars of that particular set of strategies was the promotion of non-motorized transport, otherwise called active transport. Pero natulog po yon for a while. Since 2009, medyo natulog, wala masyadong nangyayari. Pero ngayon po, because of the pandemic, the department really encourages cycling and other modes of non-modal mobility devices is an alternative travel mode, because this actually encourages social distancing. And DOTR continues to work with DPWH and DILG to ensure that we have protected bikeways. Hindi lang po basta bikeways, kailangan po protected bikeways po, no? So there are plans already for the interim and the long-term plan of this. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Pero hindi pa po tapos ang laban. Alam ko po marami pa pong pagkukulang sa transportasyon po, no? Kaya po patuloy po ang department to move forward. So as we hit the new normal. So on the ground po, ito po isang importanteng gusto namin i-share is meron pong we're actually crafting transfer plans for displaced PUJ and UV operators. Ibig pong sabihin ito, yung mga nationalized, hahanapan po sila ng iba pang viable routes for displaced operators, no? So yun po ang ibig sabihin ng transfer plans. We're also continuing with the construction of bus stations for the interim plan. We're also really pushing for economic interventions, including fuel subsidy, restructuring of existing loans, and provision of new loans. And dati kasi po ang equity, if for jeepney drivers, it's only 80,000. That has now been increased to 160,000 per unit to encourage more PUJ operators to modernize. And earlier on in my presentation, I discussed service contracting. And now, moving forward, we'd like to apply service contracting in the Greater Manila area. Another thing that we do moving forward, next slide please, is we look at data, right? So at the Planning and Project Development Office, so I think some of my DOTR colleagues are here. Dr. Sandy Gaspa. I hope she's here. So we are seeking to work with data to understand the travel patterns. So what we did was we got data from Waze, and so we plotted it. So we are noticing that the lowest speed, okay, the lowest speeds are experienced between, what time is it? Sorry. Lowest speeds are between 9 to 10 a.m., 4 to 6 p.m. northbound, and southbound 4 to 5 p.m. Saturday speeds are worst in the afternoon. So parang, actually, this is very interesting because I was talking to somebody and they said, now even in the new normal, it looks like it's still really congested, and it still is, you know? So that's still a problem for us. That has not gone away. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. All right. The top 3 routes with lowest speed based on the numbers that we crunched would be Calentong Pasig, Cubao Doroteo Jose, and Cubao Montalban. Cubao seems to be a bottleneck for right now. So these are things that we need to look at. So the next slide please, would show you that the most congested segments, I'm not going to read all of this, but just to show you that we are actually looking at the data that we have, so we would be able to understand travel patterns. So we look at which areas are more congested, are most congested. So we look at transport options in those areas. All right, next slide, please. I'm now at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. Now, this pandemic has caught everyone off guard, and no one has full understanding of how we can deal with it fully. But good practices on the ground has shown these 5 strategies to work. Demand control. That means we should continue to implement work from home schemes, flexi time, staggered work hours, and the CSC has also come up with alternative work schedules. The second one is to reduce passenger density and also to reinforce temperature monitoring and disinfection, something that we are doing right now. The third one is to ensure logistics, the movement of goods and emergency logistics for essential supplies should be focused on. Number 4 is leveraging technology. Now, in other areas, they look at preservation system. Like if you were to ride the train system, you would reserve ahead of time so you can get on this. Right? And then, of course, reduce the waiting time. And then the last category is to look at flexible management to control external traffic by, this is actually connected to number 4, by using, for instance, a reservation in advance. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Now, as we all struggle, as a government hobbles to try and meet all the demands for transport, the World Health Organization has actually encouraged everybody to look at the whole of society approach, that we can all work together so we can build back better. And I'd like to end with what we usually say. It used to be that we heal as one. Now it's really important that we recover as one. Thank you everyone for listening. I'll take your questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, I was muted. Thank you very much, Asik. We already generated actually a few questions in the Q&A box, but as you mentioned, you will be answering these questions at the end of both presentations. All right. So once again, thank you. I'd probably do a sort of a summary again before the open forum. Participants will be reminded of what you presented. All right, thank you. All right, on to the next presentation. Okay, sorry, all right. We are fortunate to have as a resource person today, a person who had more than 20 years of technical and managerial experience on large, complex transportation projects in US, Europe, and Asia, presumably including the Philippines perhaps. He is a seasoned project manager and team leader and an effective communicator. He is currently the associate director and a consulting business leader for the, I believe, the Philippine office for Arup. Arup is a global engineering consulting company with more than 10,000 engineers, planners, and consultants. And I believe that the headquarters is in London. I got this from Google, so perhaps our speaker would verify this later on. He started in Arup in the mid-1990s as a transportation planner and rose in rank as project manager, and now associate director, consulting business leader. Within the last 12 years also, since 2008, he provided expert transportation planning advice to private and public clients in the US and overseas as part of Greenway Transportation Planning. So that's a company based in Minnesota, USA. So this company specializes in multimodal transport strategies. His list of specialities include mass transit or public transport planning, pedestrian and bicycle planning, sustainable transportation strategies, traffic impact studies, and transportation modeling and simulation. He obtained his Master of Science in Transportation Management in the year 1991 in City University of London. And we are of course proud because he is an alumnus of the UP of the University of the Philippines. He obtained his Bachelor of Civil Engineering in 1987, of course in UP. He's also active in the community. He became president of the UP Alumni Association in Minnesota for 3 years from 2015 to 2017. And he served as a member of the District 12 Community Council Board of Directors in the Transportation and Equity Committees of the City of St. Paul. All right, our next speaker is currently working with the Department of Transportation as well as the DPWH, and I believe also working with ASEC Sheila on shaping the Philippines' transport infrastructure for the coming decades. So to present the future of transportation planning for resilience, let's all warmly welcome Engineer John Mark Lucas. Engineer John.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.
So magandang hapon ho sa lahat. And again, before I start, I'd like to thank the UP Institute of Civil Engineering for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you on the future of transportation, especially during this anniversary celebration. It's unfortunate that we do not get the chance to visit the alma mater. I would have loved that. But on the other hand, it's also an opportunity to reach a wider audience. So I'm thankful for that. So here's our agenda. First, we will look at the global trends shaping the way we travel. Next, how technology is shaping the future of transportation. And lastly, I'll share some thoughts on the short and long-term changes in urban mobility as in a post-COVID world. First, a quick intro about Arup. Sean was very generous there. So, like I said, we're a global company with 88 offices, and we've been in the heart of many of the world's most prominent projects in the built environment. You might recognize some of these structures. Founded in 1946 with an initial focus on transportation engineering, Arup has since grown into a truly multidisciplinary organization today with about 16,000 designers, engineers, planners, and consultants. in 88 offices across 33 countries. In Asia, we've been here for about 50 years. And in the Philippines, we have been working in the Philippines since 1986 and opened our permanent office in Manila in 1990. I started working on Manila projects in 1994, actually, for a while. And our work at the moment goes from buildings to water to energy to transportation and advisory. As Sean mentioned, we're working with ASEC Sheila on a number of projects and very thankful for that, for their partnership. So let's look first at the global trends on, where we are and how did we get here. So I think a lot of you are familiar with this. Traffic congestion is common to all cities. And this could be a quiz, but let's just look at how many you could identify. So I hope we all got Manila down at the bottom right, down here. And as you could see, it's something that we share with a lot of cities. I know most of you are aware of this, but just to reiterate, it's estimated that the commuters spend an average of 100 hours a year in traffic jam, costing about $1,400 a year. Now for Metro Manila, again, this is a very common number that everyone talks about. Of course, we excel in the Philippines, so we excel in this too, right? But unfortunately, it's not good news because, it means that we are about US 2,000 or 100,000 pesos a year per person wasted on traffic. So how did we get here? And what global drivers dictate what's next? First, it's global urbanization. Our urban population is growing and will continue to grow. And it's because cities will continue to be the best place to meet the greatest needs among our people. By 2050, it is estimated that 7 out of 10 persons will live in urban areas. The map here shows the countries with the predicted greatest number of urban population. As shown, Philippines is in the top 10. Interestingly, most Asian countries, including China and India, will continue to have at least 25% of their population remaining in the suburban and rural areas, shown as yellow. This may, however, have more to do with the poor state of our cities rather than the attractiveness of rural or suburban areas. Second is our growing and aging population. 20% over 60 by 2050. Demographic and socioeconomic shifts will result in a new global order. 90% of the population growth is expected to occur in the cities of the developing world. In the Philippines, you could see here, we're looking at 10% of the population greater than 65 years old in 2050 from 5% today. And it's just worth pointing out that, we are a young country. Third, cities around the world are seeing some behavioral change, particularly around ownership and expectation. Bike and car share schemes, car clubs, TNVS like Grab here are getting more popular. We are moving away from owning our own vehicle in urban areas, and this is a global trend that's continuing. We are also becoming more aware of the benefits of active transportation. And I think, as you could see, ASEC Sheila and I are going to be flying the flag on this. Fourth, changing weather patterns. Resilience to climate change will also be a driver of future transport solutions, as we know only too well here in the Philippines, in Metro Manila in particular. Global warming is real, as demonstrated in this global surface temperature anomaly graph. The red bars show the deviations higher than the long-term averages. It's a lot of red. This is resulting in more frequent and intense extreme weather events, and we really are all familiar with this. This will continue to significantly impact our coastal areas, destroying infrastructure and flooding cities. Next, increasing demand for energy and resources will force us to make changes. Energy from alternative fuels and plug-in hybrid are increasingly common. The perception of the electric car is changing. You know, Tesla is now sexy, right? There are still concerns with range, but induction charging now has full-scale trials. That's where you charge, basically the charger is on the road and you have wireless charging. We are collaborating with Mitsui in testing an induction charge bus route in the UK. And lastly, technology. Technology and connectivity will lead us to new ways of making travel decisions, using new construction materials, as mentioned in one of our earlier webinars as part of this series, planning, designing, and operating our infrastructure, and could even give rise to new modes of travel. This includes personal rapid transport here, drones, connected autonomous vehicles, and increasingly, other, electric motorized vehicles. So let's talk about the new mobility then. It's these drivers that are changing the way we travel. The future of transportation will be shaped by data. And Asek Sheila already made a lot of mention of this. Our system will be data-driven versus infrastructure-driven. Historically, technology was seen as a way to manage infrastructure solutions. ITS, or Intelligent Transportation Systems, are used to monitor, advise, and control infrastructure. Technology, however, is fast becoming a driving force rather than an enabler. Data is gold, as a lot of the young people now know this, and as we are using it. Mobility as a service, which is a really an interesting concept, is starting to change the way people think about travel. I'll get more into this later. Also, a generation gap is appearing. I'm sure a lot of the students could talk to this. Travelers of the future have different expectations and requirements, which has been all opened up by new technology. This is the future of transportation, intelligent mobility. The figure shows the different layers, which I will discuss further in the next slides. You have the base 4 components governed by an operational strategy, pricing, and the whole system is contained within a combined data network. So first, autonomous vehicles. It could take various forms, applications as shown, from low speed to mid-speed shuttles, to ride sharing, to logistics, delivery robots. This a wide range of factors will, however, influence how quickly autonomous vehicles enter the fleet in large numbers. This includes technological advances, cost reduction, public attitudes, and legal responses. The change to in-vehicle passenger use of time will also see autonomous vehicles compete with other modes of public transportation. So if you could read the book or eat your meal while you're traveling, you wouldn't mind traveling for 2 hours, right? Large-scale uptake of autonomous vehicles has implications on road infrastructure. Roads could be narrower, and roadside signage could be reduced, for example. And driverless cars could also increase the capacity of existing infrastructure, as they could safely travel in decreased proximity. Second, intelligent transport systems and technologies allow transport modes to communicate with each other and with the wider environment. So you've probably heard about these concepts: vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle to infrastructure, and vehicle to everything. Just like the Waze data, vehicle to your phone. Connected technology is necessary for safe passing, safe pedestrian crossing, intersection prioritization, a lot of things. Connected vehicles will help enhance safety, efficiency, mobility, and productivity through sharing of information. Third, electrification. While fossil fuels dominated the transportation sector for the last century, electricity will play an increasingly important role in both personal and public surface transportation in the future. Advances in battery technology and other storage technologies, further reductions in cost, as you could see in this graph, will mean that electrification is increasingly viable. Inductive or wireless charging will increase take-up, especially from buses and taxis, and new forms of motorized personal transport, such as e-bikes and e-scooters, will become more common. Fourth, shared mobility. And we see this happening now here in Metro Manila. Traditional models of ownership are changing, and platform-based peer-to-peer services are disrupting a growing number of industry sectors worldwide. The trend towards a shared economy of service provision rather than product ownership means that private individuals, for example, can purchase access to goods and services directly from each other or via the internet or mobility service providers. So you got your bike share, you got your car share, you got TNVS, you have point-to-point services that you book. This change in shared mobility can help put the backbone of the transport system back on public transport, actually. This is an exciting new concept. Journey planners, you know, the ones where you could use Google to move from one place to plan your trips, and a lot of transit agencies offer this now, already facilitate multimodal journey selection, including walking and cycling options. Interoperable ticketing and new payment systems, especially now that we're accelerating our transfer to a cashless payment, will encourage intermodal travel by providing a more fluid and convenient connection, resulting in a seamless integrated transport experience for the user, you know, which really should be the center of all this. This is the emerging offer of mobility as a service. Actually, just last week, Uber in Hong Kong started sharing transit trip planning options in its ride-hailing app. At some point, the idea is that you will be able to make a single booking and payment for trips across different modes. At Arup, we have been investigating 40 cities for their readiness to adopt a mobility as a service global app. And this work continues. These four components operate within an operational strategy that is set as that sets its pricing protocol. So a quick note on mobility pricing. Of course, it's critical because obviously it's key because someone has to pay for this. There are three ways to do this. All of these are already in place in various forms. You have pricing the usage, road pricing, curb space on parking. You could price the place, which is congestion zone, which is like what you have for emission charging and congestion charging in London, where they have emission charging zones. Then you have HOV and HOT lanes, high occupancy vehicle or high occupancy tolled lanes. In the US, where other places where gas tax is a major source of funding because of decreasing tax from gasoline sales, price per trip is becoming more common. Mileage-based fee is being suggested. So what could the emerging mobility trends mean for our cities? You know, just like with the current pandemic, it's difficult to tell where we are really. You know, do we know where we are? What we know is that the future is uncertain. With most technologies, we follow the hype cycle, where there is an initial period of adoption, reaching a peak of an inflated expectation, followed by a drop as the technology matures and usage matures, then followed by a gradual adoption to its full productivity. Now, this would vary from case to case, obviously, for different types of technologies. But what we anticipate is that there would be many benefits from this, from safer streets to less parking connected with vehicle ownership. There will be rich source of data just like what Sheila was referring to, the data with Waze, it allows us to have more data for city planning. And this becomes, a greater request from the cities when new transport operators come in to share their data, not just to monitor their performance, but actually to look at how they could be used for the city's own purposes. With this, we could do more for less, and that goes towards efficiency. And we could also accelerate the electrification of our transport system. And it's not just electrification at this point. People are starting to talk about green hydrogen power. So this will help us move away from fossil fuels for a more sustainable future. But there are challenges to getting there. And we need to find our way of dealing with this too. Declining transit ridership might result due to more attractive personal travel. Increased mileage as the tediousness of driving is eased. Like I said, if you have someone driving, you don't mind traveling more. Cybersecurity will be an issue as we rely on more digital technology. And all of this are fairly new, so it would require a long-term strategic investment from the government. And as we automate, one thing that we need to consider is how do we address displaced labor. We should remember, however, that technologies are not solutions themselves. So we need to continuously focus on the users. This is how we should design our future transportation network. It is a cycle that starts with the user's needs and through the physical environment or what we build, through to the digital environment. As we learn how our initiative is working, and then to coming up with different operational strategies to respond to the changing users' needs. And on the next slide, I'll present some ideas on how transportation in our cities has changed and could evolve in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So for this one, I'll be taking a more regional approach. So how do we rethink urban resilience post-pandemic? So what is a resilient system? Briefly, in a concise statement, it is one that responds well during normal times and times of crisis. We have done extensive research to identify 5 traits of resilience in our transport systems. The first one is robustness, to withstand hazard events with historic and real-time data used to forecast and mitigate potential challenges. Redundancy with spare capacity to accommodate disruption and provide alternative routes. Flexibility, and that is the flexibility to facilitate systems to change, evolve, and adapt to dynamic circumstances. Responsiveness, and that's responsiveness to support data exchange, allowing commuters to make informed decisions. And coordination of systems to facilitate consistent decision-making aligned to the desired outcomes. China, again, looking at data, right? China has the longest history of travel disruption. So let's look at them first. And this data is from Baidu. It's taking January 13 as the baseline. The cities shown here are Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Wuhan. And like as Sheila was showing earlier, it takes time for travel to return back to normal. It took 8 weeks in Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou for travel levels to return to 80 to 90% of pre-COVID levels. Wuhan experienced the most delay, and they had 77 days of lockdown. And you could see here how it's trailing. Now let's look at other cities. These are the graphs as of last week for other major cities. This data uses Apple devices and it looks at the direction search request as a measure of travel activity. Same thing, January 13 is taken as the baseline. And it shows the different values for walking in yellow, transit for purple, and driving in red. What you can see that Tokyo and Manila are well below at about 50% of pre-COVID levels, while other cities have pretty much returned to normal level for driving. What you could also see is that transit is lagging recovery, the purple line. This is the challenge to getting back to normal. Cities that have recovered transit ridership well are Singapore. They've gone up to about 40%. And not included here, but Hong Kong, which has gone back to about 20% of normal. So there is a way out of this. The pandemic also has highlighted the strengths of new mobility forms. Ride sharing for critical workers, as we've done here too, and autonomous vehicles for deliveries, for robots. These were widely used in Wuhan. And then, like what we're doing now with the bike lanes, the reconfiguration of roads to serve increased walking and cycling demand. As this looks at the different responses for different cities in the region. As you can see, similar measures were implemented across East Asia. Disinfection, physical distancing, compartment separation, health codes and temperature checks, and mask wearing. This inventory was done in mid-June using staff from our various offices. You could see also that how various cities had different levels of enforcement. Seoul had everything mandatory at that time. So the short-term changes that we see that has happened here, while it is still early to understand the full range of impacts, we see a number of things emerging. And this is consistent with what Asek Sheila was saying. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention. We could learn from it. And the importance of having travel mode choices is what's coming out. The importance of good pedestrian and bicycle facilities and their potential contribution to reducing vehicular traffic. It has given us an opportunity to demonstrate a way of rationalizing our bus services along EDSA. And also in Cebu, as I understand, we now have a BRT light operation, as we would like to call it. This is not new. I was working in San Francisco during 9/11, and the concerns about the Bay Bridge and the train tunnels being closed because of disruption forced the city to look at improving its ferry systems. So we learn about these things, and the pandemic is nudging people to think about transportation differently. The long-term changes that we could talk about is, as we're doing now with this webinar, increased telecommuting, remote working. We have seen that technology can enable us to work remotely and remain productive. A very big benefit for those of us who spend hours commuting daily. There's greater focus on health and well-being. As with any medical scare, it brings into focus the physical toll of our daily commute. Waking up at 5 a.m. to avoid traffic or queuing. We are also discovering local living. Again, like Asek Sheila's data was showing, the mobility around residential areas has increased. We have been forced to reconnect with our local shops, markets, and other businesses, and there's economic impacts on that. A lot have discovered the benefits of active travel, its efficiency, freedom, and under the right conditions, the enjoyment that it brings. The long-term infrastructure response remains the same, actually, despite the pandemic. We see greater use of shared mobility. We see a smarter infrastructure that enables us to respond to changing needs and greater emphasis on climate and hazard mapping for a resilient system. What the pandemic has shown is that now more than ever, we should continue towards intelligent mobility solutions that are centered on needs. We need to accelerate the digital transformation for our transportation network to develop and adopt new mobility solutions. This will give us a flexible and responsive system that is smart, green, and resilient. Again, I would like to thank the UP Institute of Civil Engineering and the Anniversary Committee for inviting me to share my thoughts on the future of transportation. The great thing about this field is that we are all transportation experts because we do this every day. So I look forward to discussing this further with you. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Engineer John or Engineer John Mark.
Thanks, Sean.
Nowadays, Engineer John, talagang lahat yata eksperto sa traffic. No? Everyone had a comment, just suggestion,
Yeah.
and everything. Okay. Before we move on to the open forum, perhaps as I mentioned earlier, I'd just like to just give a brief outline of the presentations made, just to remind our participants what you presented. So starting with Dr. or Asik Sheila's presentation, which was entitled Transportation Operations Under the New Normal, based on the DOTR plans. She divided the presentation into an old normal, a new normal, and then the moving forward. No? And then, of course, in the old normal, we are all familiar with that, the problems on traffic congestion, problems with public transportation. And during the post-ECQ, of course, it is expected that the mobility dropped. In fact, from the graph shown, I kind of saw parang it dropped by 100%, no, roughly. Because primarily only the essential trips are allowed, basically. And then during the post-ECQ, the government has been careful in going back to normal mobility. It has to be phased, and an emphasis on safety. Basically, there's a balance, no? A balancing act between mobility and safety, no? Or health. We also have, of course, because of that balancing act, we need to reduce the vehicle capacity. And the result is that this is post-ECQ, there has been efforts in rationalizing, again, the routes to be opened. We started service contracting, and then the use of technology to enhance no contact operation between the drivers and the passengers, and of course the promotion of active transport. In the new normal, it has been seen that there's going to be more activity in the service contracting part, and of course the more intent look on data, no, on the travel patterns as well as the link travel speeds. And as moving forward, or activities for moving forward, we have controlling demand, managing capacity, ensuring logistics, leveraging technology, and flexible management. Now for the second presentation, presented by Engineer John Mark Lucas, the presentation was entitled Future of Transport Planning for Resilience. He started with global trends. Again, we saw the common problem of traffic congestion with the corresponding money value. And then he went on with the driving force for planning in the future. There's our urbanization, the growing and aging population. We have behavioral change, like there's a change in car ownership and the use of emerging modes, such as the mobility as a service, or MaaS, and active transportation again. The changing weather patterns, growing demand for energy and resources, as well as technology and connectivity. He kind of described what new mobility is. The future will be data-driven versus infrastructure-driven. There's going to be intelligent mobility because quote-unquote data is gold. Now, the components of the new mobility will be autonomous vehicles for urban use. We have the use of intelligent transportation systems, or ITS. We have the vehicle-to-vehicle, vehicle-to-infra, and vehicle-to-everything. We have the use of electric vehicles because they are getting to be more cost efficient because of the ongoing technological improvements. Another component of new mobility will be shared mobility. And then the public transportation would be in the form of mobility as a service. Then we also have the component on mobility pricing modes. He mentioned that there are three basic modes. These are pricing the usage, pricing the place, and then pricing the trip. He mentions about benefits as well as the challenges. And in the last part, he discussed or defined or described what urban resilience is in the concept of transportation planning from here on for the new in the future. No? It is characterized as sustainable, integrated, flexible, and robust. And during the pandemic, he observed that there has been similar strategies related to social distancing implemented in different parts of the world, but differing enforcement levels. And he ended with some short-term and long-term impacts of the pandemic. For the short term, we have the change in travel demand, change in the mode choices. We have the use of automation and rearranging spaces. And for the long term, we expect increase in telecommuting or working from home, greater focus in health and well-being, rediscovering the local living, more active travel. And he ended by saying that the future will have we are going to see intelligent mobility solutions. Okay, I hope I gave justice to the presentations by giving that capsule outline. So now, dear speakers, are you ready to answer questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Now the reason I'm laughing because I already peeped in the Q&A and it's like very few for John Mark. So John Mark, you have to help me answer some of the questions. All right, so go ahead.
I think that was expected.
Okay. So let me go through the questions if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We have the first question in the
Ah.
Q&A box from Engineer Rene Santiago. He is, of course, a co-member in our Transportation Society of the Philippines, of which ASEC Sheila and myself are members also. EDSA Quezon Avenue is elevated. Where is the location of the bus station?
Well, according, hindi naman ako muted, no? Okay. According, when I saw that Engineer Rene, I actually asked LTFRB because they're the ones doing this. I need to make sure that, yeah. And according to them, it's at the MRT3 station double, yung bus station. Because the way it's done is some of these are curbs stations. Short answer. Continue.
All right. So I hope Engineer Rene was satisfied with that answer. Okay. Then we have from Mr. Joel Villegas. I will just read the question, okay? As mentioned in the rationalized bus routes, which are gradually implemented, there are specific boarding and lighting locations which are aimed to be strictly implemented. However, in actual operations, these aren't followed. Bus drivers feel boarded the light along sections that do not have enforcers. Sounds familiar. How can we improve this condition? Have we already published official stops along the rationalized routes so that commuters could be guided? Can we use technology, perhaps GPS, to monitor this?
So your question actually has two layers. Let me just deal with the first one. You said that has there been information on where the stops are? And LTFRB said that they have information because there's about 50, if I'm not mistaken, about 56 bus stops so they have this bus route. I'm not sure how widely disseminated this is, but according to LTFRB, they have this already. On the second one, where you have using GPS to track the drivers who do not follow rules, we're actually working with some developers. In fact, the Department of Science and Technology, they have several researches that are that would look at how do we leverage GPS, for instance, to determine whether they stop at the proper stop. So it's a work in progress. And yes, to answer your question, GPS is a viable technology to monitor the drivers. After all, just to add, all the PUVs, all the modern PUVs already have onboard technology. So therefore, it can be used to monitor them. But thank you for flagging that concern.
All right. Thank you. I skipped this question. This was actually posted much earlier from Williamson.
Sorry, okay na ako. Sorry, choppy. Right. Choppy na naman ako.
Okay, Asik, are you still with us? All right. From Williamson, Mr.
Yeah, I'm still here. A little bit choppy, but yeah.
All right. Good morning from Bahrain.
Sorry. Nawawala. Nawawala.
Can you hear us, Asik?
Yes. Now you're back. Sorry.
All right. Okay, good morning from Bahrain, according to Williamson. Okay, ma'am, is there any program by the department to pass to the public transport operator to sanitize their public transport vehicles? If they do, how shall the department monitor this? By engineering.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your question. That's always a good way to start it. No? Thank you for your question. Well, that is actually one of the reasons why we have a gradual resumption of public transportation, because sanitation, health protocols should be strictly adhered to. So, for instance, if you look at the PUVs that we have right now, they have been granted the right to operate, provided that they will follow strict implementation. For right now, I still need to check with LTFRB if they have enough manpower to check on whether they're doing the sanitation, but it's a what do you call this? It's a basic requirement for them to be able to operate, is to have sanitation facility, especially big buses, for instance. So they have to have sanitation facilities. I'll have to get back to you on monitoring.
All right. If I may insert my own question, I've been watching, of course, the news, no? And there's this news about yung mga jeepneys natin using those plastic ngayon, and I think parang hindi na daw pwede yon, and some of the jeepney drivers do not know how to proceed, whether is it okay, or are there guidelines? Basically, I think that's the question. Are there guidelines now for the PUV?
For the jeepneys, for the jeepneys. Now, in an evaluation that TSSP did on the level of risk for the different PUVs, the jeepneys have the highest, have high risk. Why is that? Because they're front facing, right? So therefore, it's important to have protocols to to ensure that there's no transfer of if somebody sneezes, it's not transferred across. I'm not quite sure, and then I'm gonna check my friend at LTFRB if they have standards already for jeepneys, because I know tricycle naalala ko, pero jeepneys hindi. Back to you on that.
Hello, Asik.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, can I go to an engineer for I have a question for Engineer Lucas. Are you done?
Yes, yes, please. Yes, yes. Thank you, John.
Question. Sige, pagpahingahin muna natin si...
Para makahinga.
Oh, sige. All right. Again, from Engineer Rene Santiago, question for Engineer Lucas. How much did Arup... okay. How much did build the Philippine government for the feasibility studies of the mega bridges?
Maybe I shouldn't answer that question, but for transparency, if you go into the ADB website, the IPIF innovation, the preparation innovation, the IPIF program, right, was about $300 million US, and that's split into 3 different components: water, highways, and then there's the public transportation. And now a lot of that work also, that's funding for everyone, including sub-consultants, and we're working with a lot of local consultants to deliver these projects, and the same for the other people who got the packages as well. And so it really is going to be a question of value for money, right? Ang nangyari dyan, of course, you bring in a new set of tools. And what we did at the very beginning was, ang dami nitong projects that have been 10, 15 years, how many times they've been studied and they never went forward because there was lack of confidence in the technical analysis that was done for them. So we looked at them, and a lot of those projects are going to be, world record beating projects, that they've been just spinning their wheels and consuming, resources. So that's one thing that we did, was we triaged all these projects and came out with what would be the most reasonable, what would be technically feasible, what would be financially feasible to deliver good value for money for what comes afterwards. And as you could see now, a few of those things have passed NEDA approval. They're moving on to detailed engineering design. And the work on this is not just the mega bridges. We're also involved in the rail. Like for the rail network, we're basically the government's advisor. We're doing transaction advisory services for them to make sure that the designs are done well. And secondly, to help the government craft a franchising agreement on some of these projects that would be beneficial to the government. So you're not giving away money. So we're an independent consultant in that way, offering advice to get a better deal for the government for projects that go forward. And this is done, as I said, in collaboration with consultants from all different fields in the Philippines, as well as ADB's own consultants, and NEDA people as well. And of course, with DOTR and DPWH providing a lot of significant input to get the system right.
Right. We hope that you're going to be successful in your assistance to our government in that respect, or in those respects. Another question for you, Engineer John, from Roy Pablo, Engineer Roy Pablo of FINMA and Araulio University. Do you see any abrupt changes in our transportation facilities that could immediately impact the current situation of the Philippines compared to other countries in Asia? What do you recommend to our country that best fits our situation now?
Actually, ASEC Sheila is, they're doing a lot of the right things already, and we've spoken a lot of this already. Ang Filipino matalino eh, right? We know how to do, what to do, what needs to get done. And sometimes it's stuff like this that nudges you towards action. So bus rationalization, we're getting that done now. Our traffic problem, the way I looked at it for the longest time, it's a labor problem. Yeah, it's unsafe because franchising is done. Competition for franchising is done on the street. Doon sa kalsada naglalaban yung franchising eh, instead of bidding on on boards, on contracts. So that's one thing. And then what we're doing with active mobility, with active transportation, we've neglected it for the longest time. And what we should think here is that, transportation is only one component of the urban infrastructure. So we need to start thinking about green infrastructure. It's going to be very difficult to ride your bike on EDSA because it's really hot. There's no trees. What we've done, we've tried to do infrastructure solutions all the time. And so that's why the focus should be on data and more integrated planning on what our transport solutions are. So key there would be to look about green infrastructure, resilience, and again, focusing on what the user actually needs. So hats off to ASEC Sheila, and we'll be supporting them on what they do with active mobility.
Are you basically implementing now the project already lined up in accordance with the master plan? Or are you in the position to propose perhaps new infrastructure or strategies?
In a position, which master plan? So, I mean, there's projects that are moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps like the NEDA approved projects, for instance. Most of the engagements now are or deals with those approved projects.
Some of them have gone into detailed design now or moving into detailed design. The EDSA Greenways, you've probably heard a lot about extending the catchment area for the MRT stations around the 5 busiest train stations in EDSA. We were working with the project team in Cebu for Cebu BRT for the franchising agreement. There's a couple of projects with like Samal Davao. Work is ongoing on the north-south commuter rail, where the government's representative reviewing some of the technical input. So a lot of this on the build projects are moving forward, and we hope to continue doing that with another 6 to 8 months of of the commitment.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to another question from the participants. This time from Sir Tito Aliga. He wants to thank John and Sheila. It would be good to check measures being implemented by surveying feedback from public transport commuters, the laborers, people who cannot work from home. Those who can work from home have seen the positive effect, and their employers will probably never require this staff to physically report to their offices. Yeah, I think this is more of a comment. But would you have a further comment on that?
No, I just want to say hi, Sir Tito, and I agree with him. I agree with him. Feedback is important. Feedback is important when we have projects. If we're implementing, feedback is important. So yes, we agree.
All right. I'll go back to ASEC Sheila. Okay, let me go back again from same a question from Sir Tito again. Still rather. It would be good for your slides to show travel time versus number of passengers. Then we can project maybe that if we reach the 90% load level, what do we expect the travel time to be? I guess that's also a comment, no?
Just noted travel time there is vehicle travel time, and it's also not dependent on the load. I guess that for the old normal, that was actually travel time, in vehicle travel time. Pag nagbibiyahe po, pag sumasakay. Pero noted po yung comment.
All right. An interesting question from Adrienne Cruz. Car manufacturers have been releasing price
Kanino?
promos
Ah,
for brand new cars such as zero down payment, low interest rates, causing continuous rise in private vehicles. Should we impose a more stringent guideline aside from increase in tax to control traffic congestion in the future? Sa mga policy strategies.
so si John na bahala niyan kasi kwan yan eh. Future yan eh. John? Can you answer that, please?
So it's not a government statement then.
Yes,
Yeah, it has to be a carrot and sticks approach on any of this, right? You know, we have to realize the true cost of congestion. And you know, I believe that in all of this, it's about providing choices. Yeah. So people are going to make their choice based on their sensitivity to cost, based on their sensitivity to travel time. And yes, we have to do all of those. And you know, that's been demonstrated in other countries. You know, where like in Singapore, you have a limited number of vehicle licenses that you could own, right? So you have to buy the right to own a vehicle. In Hong Kong, it's not limited license, but cost is prohibitive to do. And also in our planning, you know, we're still building car parks, you know, and we have this standard of parking minimums. In a lot of countries, in a lot of big cities, we start talking about parking maximums. So it's the other way around. You know, there's no point building a car park with, you know, another 5,000 spaces of vehicles cannot get there. So it is a chicken and egg, and there's a lot of policies that, you know, are going to come in. It's going to be very complicated, but the whole idea is that it has to be an integrated approach. And I think, you know, the government as it is open to a lot of those approaches.
all right. Question for Doc Sheila from Anthony Pantaleon. What are the long-term plans for the railway sector, provided that it is operating on a limited capacity, as its operation would not really be sustainable in the long run?
Long term? I'm trying to think about how to answer the question, because there's already a long-term plan for railways, and for MRT3, I think they were really just sidetracked by the fact that they had numerous COVID positive employees, so you know, maintenance was stalled for a while. But there are plans already for the refurbishment of MRT3, and even extending, like for instance, the central station is also one of the important railway project, because it will link the different rail lines. So it's difficult to answer that here, but there is a long-term plan for railway. The limited capacity, this is what I'd like to just say right now. Right now, the limited capacity is not brought about because of the inefficiency of the system. It is because it is a requirement for health protocols. You know, DOTR is at the forefront of transport, but everything that we do will have to be approved by the Interagency Task Force. So for right now, in fact, we're making representations to increase the capacity, but it will have to still be approved by the Interagency Task Force.
All right.
And can I say something?
Yes, please.
And I think we also have to remember that this is unusual circumstances, and this is temporary. the long-term plan, as I was saying, is going to continue. We're going to have capacity. Yeah. We're going to go back to sitting next to each other
Yeah.
because, that's the way it's going to work. And, even now that's being done, kararating ko lang nung Biyernes sa aeroplano, magkakadikit na kami. So if you improve ventilation, if you have personal protection, we just need to get over slowly and getting into that frame of mind and doing what we need to do, to get, people, bums on seats again. But the long-term plan is there. It's for capacity expansion.
There,
It's just a small hiccup that we have to figure out, and until we get the safety concerns addressed. And in Hong Kong, they're back to sitting next to each other on the bus. Sitting next to each other on the train. And we change our behavior.
Too.
Yeah, in Vietnam too. So we just changed our behavior. You're not there without your mouth covered or shouting across this, to someone else. So it's a case of adaptation to find what works for us.
Yeah.
And to help the system recover.
Yeah.
I think we should parang may perspective na itong planning for the new normal is like a parang short term din kasi we know that this is I don't know, this is like temporary, right? If you're optimistic, we will go back to the old normal, no? Of course with additional changes. But about long term here, no? So right after the pandemic is still sort of short term, di ba?
Yeah.
So may mga
short term if you think of a
lifetime. But perhaps this time we're going to have the additional factor for health, no? For health concerns.
Sean, can I just answer back to the person who asked about the jeepneys?
Yes, please.
Anyway, for the person who asked about the jeepney,
Yes, please go ahead.
Anyway, actually kasama naman sila doon sa protocol. Ang protocol ng jeepney ay dapat, again, 50% of the vehicle capacity at dapat meron po silang impermeable na barriers in fronting them. So kailangan kasi hindi nasusunod yung 1 meter distancing, and so therefore dapat may impermeable. Ito dapat chine-check nito ang magche-check daw dapat nito ay LTO. Okay? So meron po, to answer that, meron po. Pangalawa po, may I answer yung sa kanina kasi I palmed it off to John Mark kasi I said sige para hindi na muna gobyerno. Pero it's actually, I'd like to just say, how can you discourage people from buying cars? Maybe that is not the question. Maybe the question should be, how can you encourage them to not use their cars? And all car owners, if I had a choice to not use my car and yet travel in convenience, relatively, I would not use my car. I don't have to worry about parking anymore. So I think the question should be, how do we encourage them? And that's precisely why the department has embarked on the PUV, the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program, back in 2016. Because the answer there is improve public transportation. You look at the big cities around the world, Tokyo, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Beijing, right? All of them do have a very strong public transportation, mass transport as backbone. All the transport specialists around the world are saying, as cities grow, it's no longer sustainable to use private vehicle as the backbone of your transport. It has to be public transportation. So therefore, the question should be, how do we encourage them? Improve public transportation. Support the PUV modernization program of the Department of Transportation.
May plug pa. Yeah.
May plug pa talaga.
Okay. Let me go to some questions from our Facebook Live audience. Okay? Baka magtampo sila.
Okay.
All right. From sino kaya ito? Dayo Montalvo. From Dr. Montalvo. For ASEC na palang, of course. Shouldn't MRT waiting time include the time people start to queue up to get a ride, usually starting outside the station or on the at-grade sidewalk? I think this is what
Oh.
really matters to people.
And I agree with Dr. Montalvo. If it's total travel time, that means walking time, in vehicle time, that is a very good metric. But the data that I was using was really waiting time when you're waiting for the next vehicle to be able to get on the next. So that's why I use the data of, when you're waiting in the platform, how long before you can get into the train. But that time or total travel time will have to include walk time, waiting time in the platform, and in-vehicle time.
All right.
Sagot ka ba, Dr. Montalvo?
I will apologize to Dr. Montalvo for not reading his next question. I will give chance to others. All right. From Cyrus Gomari from Technical University of Munich, Germany. No? When is the expected completion date of the protected bike lanes? What other policies have you come up with to support and encourage cycling? It would have been nice to show the average distance traveled by car users, which is less than 5 kilometers for the majority. Just stressing this can help push for a better continuous cycling network in Metro Manila. O nga naman, may limit din ang di ba? Cycling distance or even walking distance for that matter.
In literature, you would see that active transport is usually encouraged. Well, for the most part, encouraged for what they call the last mile access. So in other countries, it would be about 3 kilometers or less. Yeah. And I agree with you that it's really good to have data. But for right now, in fact, that's one of the things that we're looking at. If you look at the data that we have in all the surveys that's been done for Metro Manila, the travel distance for bikes, or even the number of bikes that actually fly, are usually not included in the survey. So this is what we're trying to also address. That's why earlier on in my presentation, I showed you, I did say that, what do you call this? I did say that we looked at patterns because, like, for instance, it looks like a lot of people are now just traveling around the residences. So that's why we need to put our bike lanes, because these are short distance trips. On guidelines, actually, I'd like to just also stress that this is not the sole undertaking of DOTR. Our partners here include the MMDA, DPWH, and even the local government units. Why? Because it's important for us to have connected bikeways. And some of these roads would have to touch on local roads, right? So just that. And so therefore, there are several guidelines that have been actually have been issued. The DILG issued theirs. I think there's one that's being developed by, developed by DOH. So there are several. So, but the thing is, I said this. When was that? I think it was yesterday, and I attended a webinar, and I say that the key here is for a coordination, is for consolidation of all these guidelines. Because if you have different guidelines issued by different entities, then this becomes confusing, right? So therefore, right now there are guidelines. So yun yung una kong sagot. Yes, may mga guidelines. Ang importante though is i-harmonize natin ito. Naglabas ang DILG, dapat titingnan din ito ng DPWH, ay harmonize tayo. Yun. So meron po mga guidelines.
Who will do the overall harmonizing or harmonization rather?
DOTR! DOTR, because DOTR is a primary policy. I'm just joking. Yeah, well, it has to be DOTR.
Okay. We're down to about our last 2 to 3 questions. Kasi we're running out of time. Question to John from the same person, Mr. Cyrus Gomari. I worked on a European Commission research project in the past for European cities to help and prepare the cities for the transition towards a more connected and automated future. What do you think are the potentials of directly preparing Philippines or Metro Manila for such a future?
The potential is good. I mean, it's like what we did with mobile phones. We leapfrog landlines. We started digital became here and wireless technology came here. So there is opportunity to leapfrog the development that other countries have had, and we should learn from them. Global mobility now, global expertise is not regionally bound. Like yourself, you've worked there, you've worked on a project, so you have that, you have the ability to adopt whatever they did to our local situation. So technology is not restricted by region, so I don't see why, we cannot leapfrog, application straight away.
Yeah. Actually, I have the same question. Kung handa na ba ang Pilipinas for that smart mobility, intelligent mobility, and so on. Anyway, it has been answered. So more questions, this time from Mars Mendoza. Do we have good application of transport-oriented development for build projects for 2022?
This is for me. I guess it's for me. Our rail development now is consciously looking into transit-oriented development. Now the key components for transport development is what they call land value capture. That means around transport hubs. So our rail projects are seriously, looking at how to develop transit-oriented development. That would mean I would like to define TOD here is like 5-minute walk from a terminal, from a transport hub to facilities, commercial facilities, and other areas. In the Cebu BRT, there also, I think my friend Dayo is also here. They also studied how transit-oriented development can also be enhanced in tandem with BRT. So it's now parang hindi isa ang masasabi ko sa kasi nga hindi na pwede yung long distance. We would like to veer away from urban sprawl, and rather we'd like to have compact development. So because we're moving towards active transport, this is also a logical movement, having compact developments so that we would be able to encourage people to use public transportation and walk around it.
All right. Asakshi, is that it?
Yes, I'm still here.
All right. All right, thank you. I apologize, but that's going to be the last question for the participants because of our time constraints. But I would like to throw a clincher question. Parang final word na rin ng ating speakers, no? I hope I don't put spot with this question, okay? So this is going to be your final message by answering this question. Okay, what changes?
Final message.
What changes?
Sorry?
Perhaps what changes or perhaps enhancements in the transportation system landscape in the Philippines do you wish for or imagine happening in the future?
Jen, you want to go first, Dibs?
Okay.
If you want.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is a wish list, right? And I honestly think we're not far from it, despite, our challenges. As I said initially, that mother is, a necessity is the mother of invention.
Mother of invention.
And that's what we need to do now. This is an opportunity for us to reset our transportation system. We think about transportation as a system with respect to green infrastructure, placemaking, and resilience. I know that we shall come out better prepared for future challenges out of this. The key, like we've said all along, is to learn from the lessons that we've learned, what we're doing now that's making a difference, and this would allow us to shape our future transportation decisions much better in a way that would accelerate our transition to a better system.
Thank you. Asik
Ako na? Oo. Hindi na lang magva-video ha because na-choppy talaga ako. I agree with JM for saying that necessity is the mother of invention. And I'd like, a key attitude that I'd like to encourage everybody to actually take on is to remember the lessons that we have learned. In the beginning of our presentation, I said that, those who do not learn from history are bound to repeat it. 1918, 1919, when they had the Spanish flu, right? Everything was reset button, right? And so therefore, I hope a key attitude is, I hope we will not forget just how swift change can come. And so therefore, we need to work together, right? And not bring each other down, but just to work together. Now, having said that, I'd like to just mention two specific enhancements in the transport sector. And one is the, to facilitate the implementation of the PUV, the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program. Sana po lahat makita nila kung gaano ang intensyon nito. No? Lahat naman po tayo ayaw natin ng pagbabago kasi natatakot tayo dahil bago. Pero isa po dapat, sana masuportahan natin yung PUV Modernization Program. By improving public transportation, we would actually be able to address a lot of these questions that we have right now. The second one is not to lose the steam, not to lose the momentum that we have right now for active transport, right? Because this is, for me, it's a breakthrough. But let's continue to work towards it and let's continue to improve it. And in the improvement of active transport, I'd like to also encourage everyone involved in it that safety is a key concern. No, one person lost because of a road crash. One person who bikes is more than is unacceptable. So yun po, no? Just to say, PUV modernization program, active transport, but let's always remember that safety is a key concern, and then because every life matters. I think I'll end on that.
All right, maraming salamat. Well, there you have it. As I close this session and having heard the interesting insights of our guest speakers, I wish to throw the same question to our webinar participants. How would you imagine, or what is your desired future transportation landscape for the Philippines? All right, we would like to thank sincerely our guest presenters, ASEC Sheila Gaabukaya-Napalang and Engineer John Mark Lucas, for sharing their time, effort, knowledge, and wisdom this afternoon and bringing to us nuggets of reimaginations on the future of transportation. It had been my pleasure serving as moderator this afternoon. I'm Sean Palmiano from the Transportation Engineering Group of the UP Institute of Civil Engineering. And I wish everyone a good afternoon and a happy weekend. Be safe, everyone, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep safe and be well.
We now go back to our Director, Chanchuling, for closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Palmiano. And thank you so much to our speakers, ASEC Sheila Napalang. Palakpakan po natin siya. we are also very thankful, really, to God. No, we prayed hard because I know she's having problems with her connectivity, but somehow we made it. No? That's part of being resilient. So it makes us confident. No, in also other aspects of our lives, we can transcend them. No, whatever hurdles we have. Also, of course, to Engineer John Mark, Lucas, it's so good to see you again after all these years. Thank you so much. No, we learned a lot from you. As you said, lahat tayo transportation experts. Ngayon nadagdagan pang pagka-expert namin ng konti. Thank you so much to our moderator, Dr. Sean Palmiano, for keeping the flow smoothly, running it very smoothly. Again, we'd like to thank that's very strong support from the following organizations: UPERDFI, Sir Tito Aliga, the Executive Director, is here, as well as the President, Ferds de la Cruz. Maraming salamat po. And may special prize daw po yung lahat na webinars na attended. I think Sir Tito will get an award. Also, we'd like to thank PICE, headed by the engineer, by the President, Engineer Bong Suero. Maraming salamat po. And through you, we are able to reach a very wide audience. We're happy to see that we're getting participants from all over the country and several from outside the Philippines. Maraming salamat din po sa participants natin from DPWH, from DOTR, and of course our alumni who are attending right now and who have also been very supportive. Engineer Mon Aliado, Val Reyes, hello. So I was just checking the participants. Apologies po if I'm not able to include everyone. So, and also Rampi Nolido, and also a classmate of ASEC Sheila, si Doji Manahan, who's watching us from Australia, I guess. So maraming salamat, and to all of you, for being here. To Sir Rene Santiago, then thank you po for your questions. To all our participants, we really appreciate your being engaging. And also to Dr. Dayo Montalvo pala. For those of you whose questions were not covered because we were running out of time, I hope you can get in touch with our speakers. We'll get their contact information and you may email them. Thank you to our speakers. And then, so we'd like to invite you once again for our webinar next Friday. That would be the last. It's going to be about the new, it's a building act, about changes in our building code. So it's going to be given by Dr. Pacheco. So it's the same time on Friday, 3 o'clock. And then, thank you, by the way, to our technical support, Anjo, Victor, Gian Ventura, and Leia Jola. Congratulations po. We were really afraid of the technical glitches, pero kahit papano naman na natapos nating maayos. So a reminder lang po, I think you have the feedback form. Kindly submit this so we can send you also your certificate of participation. So with that, I'd like to wish you all a very good evening ahead, a happy weekend. Thank you.